And whoever was introducing in the morning said that you know about this combination lock idea. And I think you had, what is it, 10, 24/7? Yeah. And think about that model. I was eating dinner with a guy who's the Alabama State chess champion. We were talking about success. And he said, if you know the combination to the lock, it doesn't matter who you are. It doesn't matter if you're black or white, young or old, male or female, if your IQ is 150 or your IQ is 50. If you know the combination, the lock has to open. And what I've discovered in my work, and I've been doing this work for 30 years. I started with a man named W. Clement Stone, who was worth $600 million back in 1968. And he taught me everything he knew about success, and I've been applying it to my own life and teaching it to others. And then I've done hundreds and hundreds of workshops where I've been the student and gone to India and studied with masters and so on over the years. But there is a combination. There is a system. If you know the combination, you can unlock success. The problem is many of us are missing a few of the numbers. And so what I'd like to do today is just kind of remind us and maybe share some of the new things that you might have forgotten. Now here's a man named J. Paul Getty. He was at once the richest man in America. And when they asked him what were the secrets of success, he said there are three. It's very simple. He said get up early, work hard, and find oil. Not that complicated. So obviously it's a little more tricky than that. At Keller Williams, they have a formula or a system. This is a real estate sales company. And they said if you'll make 5 in-person sales calls and 10 over-the-phone calls every day, write 15 thank you notes to the 15 people you talk to, and view 5 new properties, that system always produces a high success rate in this company. So it's a system. It's a formula. Again, 5, 10, 15, 5. Again, this morning, 10, 24/7 that you've learned in Peak Potentials. So there are some formulas. Now, when I studied this, I came up with 64 universal principles that I've studied over the last 36 years. I don't expect to share all those with you today. Maybe we'll get through 9 if we're lucky. But this is a book I wrote called The Success Principles. It's now in 17 languages. You can see a couple of them up there. The one on the far left is in Russian. I was just speaking in Cannes last week in France to 6,500 women from Russia, the Ukraine, and Kazakhstan. I found out my name over there is Giek. Literally, we'd come out of the hotel and there'd be 500 women going, Giek, Giek, photo, Giek, autograph, Giek. And all of a sudden, I was really glad I'm not Brad Pitt because you couldn't move. But anyway, this book has really taken Russia by storm. And there was one man stood up and he said, you know, I bought 100 copies of your book and gave them to everyone in my village, and our village has totally changed. We've changed how we're governing ourselves. We've changed how we're doing business. So we know these principles work universally. They're not just American principles. And I'll also share a little bit of some of the new ideas that I have about the law of attraction that has to come out of the secret. There's some things I think that are missing in that movie, things we said but that got edited out that I think are useful to touch on. So that's where we'll be going today. Now, would you rather take the short route or the long route to success? Very good. Me too. Wouldn't it make sense to just go straight for the cheese and not get caught in the maze? So I've devoted my life to go further and faster with less effort. My next book is called Effortless Success. Alan Cohen, who talked to you yesterday, has a book. I just bought it in the airport, didn't even know it was out yesterday, read it halfway here to Denver yesterday before I came to Aspen, called Relax into Wealth. And so what we're all seeing now is it doesn't have to be as hard as most of us had made it. So we'll talk about how we can make it a little easier. Now the promise I make, if you do the things I teach you, you can learn to double your income and double your time off and create more balance and fun in your life. And all of my students who work with me do that in 2 years or less. So it's easy to do if you put in the time and you make the commitment to do the work. Now, in my own life, as Mark shared with you this morning, we've sold over 110 million copies of our books that are in 47 languages right now. And this is little Marky Hansen that came from Waukegan, Illinois, and little Jackie Canfield who grew up in West Virginia. And when I grew up in West Virginia, we were the 48th worst state in terms of education in the country, and that's when there wasn't Alaska and Hawaii as states, so we were the bottom. I had a dysfunctional family. My mother was an alcoholic. My father was a workaholic and somewhat abusive. She divorced him when I was 6, to save the kids from getting beat up. And so if I can do it, you can do it. I graduated from the half of the class in my college that made the top half possible. So just want you to understand, it's not about brain power, but it's about how you use your brain to do the work. Okay, Mark and I also have a Guinness Book of World Records. You probably know that. We have 7 books on the New York Times bestseller list on one day. And I share that with you not to impress you about me, but to impress upon you if a little kid from West Virginia who got a C in composition in college can go on and become a best-selling author, anybody in this area here can do anything as well. There's a check written to me for $1,130,328.35. Publisher wrote that was the first check he ever wrote for $1 million. He put a smiley face in his signature. Mark and I got 4 of those checks that year. Our combined income each that year was over $6 million. Again, if I can do it, you can do it. Jim Rohn, great motivational speaker, says you can't hire other people to do your push-ups for you. Think about that. I can't hire anyone here to go to Gold's Gym and work out for me. You can't do my meditation for me. You can't do my visualization for me. All the things that I'm going to share with you are things you cannot delegate to others. This is the work. Harv said, there's work to do. You have to work on yourself. When I speak at the National Speakers Association, and people say, I want to be a speaker like you. I want to go out and make all money and affect the world and change people. What advice would you give me? And I said, the first thing is work on yourself. When I first learned about personal growth, I took 38 weekend workshops in 1 year. The only weekends I wasn't taking workshops was when there weren't any. Mother's Day, Thanksgiving, Easter, Christmas, etc. Spent $17,000 out of my $38,000 income taking workshops back when they were like $100 for a weekend. But the point is, it's that level of work on yourself that opens up and takes off the clay and allows your natural genius to come forward. Buckminster Fuller, who Mark Victor Hansen talked about, said there's no such thing as a genius. He said some children are just damaged less. It means there's less clay on the golden Buddha or the golden Christ that lives inside of each of them. Now, the first principle, if you're taking notes, this would be a good place to start. And if you're not taking notes, this would also be a good place to start. And that is to take 100% responsibility for your life and your results. Now, most of you have heard that before, but I would ask you a question. Have you ever blamed anyone for anything in the last year? We get mad perhaps at the president or the economy or the oil prices, or we blame other people for our not being successful. You literally have to give up all blaming and take 100% responsibility for your life, that you're creating it the way it is. You have to give up complaining. Complaining means I have a reference point for something I prefer that I'm not willing to risk creating. If I was complaining about my wife, it would mean that I have to have a reference point of someone better out there that I would rather be with, that I'm not willing to risk leaving my wife to go be with. Or I'd have to risk working with my wife and sharing with her there were things I didn't like about her that I would want her to change, and that might create a conversation that might be a little bit uncomfortable. But without taking that risk, I can't create what I want. If all the women in the world tomorrow died except for my wife, and I came to work, would I be complaining about my wife? No, I'd be going, hey, there's only one woman, and guess what? I got her. You only complain when there's a possibility of something better. Complaining tells you there's something I want I don't have, and when you complain, that's not an activity that's going to produce it. It's simply something that says I'm going to complain about it rather than do anything about it. Give up all justifying for why you didn't achieve your results, all defending your positions that don't work, and all excuse making. Now, I met this kid named Matty Christensen when he was 11 years old. We were interviewing him for one of our chicken soup books. And he said, if you look at the picture, you'll notice he has no arms past the elbow and no legs past the knee. He's got 2 prosthetic devices on his knee, from the knee down for his legs and his feet. And he's got a lacrosse stick appended to his arm, prosthetic device, which allows that to be his pitching hand and his catching glove. And at 11 years old, Matty's baseball team was number 2 in the state of New York, with him being the pitcher. So what that tells us is it doesn't matter what your condition is, you can still choose to create what you want and become a champion. Matty said to me when I interviewed him, he said, you have to give up all of your excuses and find a way. He says, if you're going to be successful, you have to be solution-oriented rather than a complainer. I was getting a seminar on success from an 11-year-old boy. Now, there are 3 things we have control over in your life: your thoughts, your images, and your behavior and your actions. Harv does a seminar called The Millionaire Mind. It's the idea of our thoughts making and controlling our reality. So I want to look at thoughts with you for just a minute. We'll see how the weather holds out here. Hopefully we'll make it through this. What I'd like you to do is look down at the end of your hand. You'll notice there is a little line that goes across your wrist. Does everybody have like a little indentation, a little wrinkle that goes across there? And you'll have one on the other side as well. And here's what I'd like you to do. I'd like you to line those up perfectly and then put your hands together like that, but start them so that they're coming directly from that line. And if you're like most people, you're going to find that one of your hands is a little longer than the other. Most of you find that? Take your shorter hand and put it in front of your face. If your hands are the same length when you do that, take either hand and put it in front of your face. And here's what I want you to do. I'm from California, like Barbara, so we do a lot of weird stuff there. So I want you to look at your hand, and we're going to say out loud in unison 8 times, grow longer. Okay? So we're just going to intend for our hand to grow longer. We're going to do it in unison. So here we go. 1, 2, 3. Grow longer. 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 Okay, stop. Now line them up exactly the same as before, and notice what happened. How many of you found that it did get longer? Very good. So what this shows us is the power of our intention and the power of our minds over physical matter, starting with our body, and we see that we actually have that power over physical matter all throughout the universe. Now, the good news is we can do this. The bad news, in case there are any men thinking about this, is that so far the research has only been on the hands, okay? So I don't want you to waste a lot of time tonight with this. All right. Now, we've all heard of the internet. You've all used the internet. You've got Blackberries, and you send wireless telephone calls. We can call someone in Singapore right now and talk to them. How does that work? There's waves that go through the air, and there's what we call amplitude. How high does the wave go? And there's frequency. How often does it go up and down? And by controlling those amplitudes and frequencies, we can create information. We can encode information and send it across the world. We now know. A friend of mine coined the term the internet, a guy named Bob Scheinfeld, who wrote a book called Busting Loose from the Money Game. And he made the point that we literally, every thought we think is extended around the world like a giant email sent out over this thing which he refers to as the internet. And we know that it works, and we know it goes quite far for the following reason. There is research with the astronauts where they'll have astronauts up on the moon or up in lunar modules 250,000 miles above the Earth, and they'll have them open envelopes at random times, and there'll be a shape in there like a square or a circle or a pentagon or a parallelogram or a rectangle. And they'll look at it and they'll concentrate on it for several minutes while there are students back at Duke University in the parapsychology labs who will close their eyes, go into a meditative state, and see if they can receive what the astronaut's sending. And they get a high correlation between what they're sending, way beyond chance, in terms of them able to pick up this thought form without any amplification through technology or energy waves, radio waves, that kind of thing. So we know that our thoughts can travel 250,000 miles. So I love what Ralph Waldo Emerson said. He said, "Great men are they who see the spiritual thought is stronger than any material force, that their thoughts rule the world." Our thoughts literally travel all across the world. There's actually people that are now contemplating and projecting out from their work in quantum physics and neuroscience and metaphysics that 1 hour of inner work, working with visualization, working with the law of attraction, working with affirmations, working with the power of intention, like you just did with Grow Longer, that 1 hour of that kind of work actually will produce the same results of 7 hours of physical labor in the world in terms of achieving your goals, whether they're financial goals like becoming a millionaire, or whether they're other kinds of goals like ending world hunger, that kind of thing. How many of you are familiar with the work of Dr. Masaru Emoto, the Messages of Water? Great. So Emoto's work proves that when we think thoughts about water, it changes the molecular structure of the water. So they would have students send negative energy up to a bottle of water, like, "You fool, you idiot." And what would happen, they'll take that water and they will freeze it to 20 degrees below zero, put it in a petri dish, and then they will bring it out, put it under a microscope, and they will look at that water, and as it starts to melt, it forms crystals, or not. When you send negative energy, you get this kind of blobby black formation that occurs. When you send love and gratitude or thank you, you get these beautiful crystals that look like snowflakes. And so we know that one kind of energy, which we call negative critical energy, creates one form, and positive energy creates another. Then he said, how far does this intention to the water extend? So they took 10,000 Japanese, and over a 2-hour period, they sent love to all the water in the world. This was a couple of summers ago in July. And they took water samples the day before and the day after, and look what happened. Here's water taken from Lake Biwa. It's the largest freshwater lake in Japan. The day before, this nondescript kind of energy. 2 days later, we see these beautiful crystals having been formed. Here's the St. Croix River up near Minnesota and Wisconsin. And we see the day before and we see the day after. The day after, we get these crystals. Here's the Mississippi River. We're halfway around the world, and our thoughts are still affecting the water. And as you know from Masaru Emoto's work, your body is about 80 to 85% water. Although today you're probably more like 75% because you haven't been drinking enough. But the idea is we are water, and our thoughts are affecting us and each other. And so what does this tell us about success? Every thought I think, they're not going to buy my product. They won't like my record. They're not going to give me a job. We're not going to find a parking space. You are literally sending out energy ahead of you that's pre-paving the highway you're driving down and setting up the kind of response you're going to get, especially when it deals with individuals, because you're telling them how to think. Then you walk in and they go, nah, they already have a determined kind of attitude toward you based on the thoughts you were thinking before you even met them. Back 30 years ago when I started taking workshops, we would literally bring people into we called it a laboratory or a workshop, sanctuary, and the day before we were having a meeting, we'd bring them in through a people mover and we'd interview them. What is it you need to know about me in order to make a decision? What are your hot buttons? What are your fears? What makes you decide yes? And we would get all this information from them because literally it's all available, because all the thoughts they've ever thought are out there as waveforms, like an archive that you can go to on Google or something to pull forward the information. So it's critical that we learn the power of our mind and use it. And I know most of you know this, but it's important to really see how far this extends. So again, your reality is not the cause of your thoughts and your feelings, but your thoughts and feelings are in fact what is creating your reality. Now, every thought you send is a vibration. And I want to share a story with you. Mark and I decided one day that we were going to sell 1 million books in one day. No one had ever done that up until then. Since then, J.K. Rowling's done it with, I think, the 3rd Harry Potter book. Now, at that point, there was no model to go after, no one to say, how did you do it so we can model what you did? We simply had a vision and a goal. And we started holding this in our mind every day. We'd see a picture, New York Times headline, Canfield and Hansen sell 1 million books in one day. And we visualized it, we intended it, we put energy into it, we talked about it, we fantasized about it, we believed it was possible. About 35 days later, we're at this conference in New York. We're at this conference in New York where they have the American Booksellers Association convention. And I get on a bus after the convention to go back to the hotel. I sit down next to this woman, and she says, "You're Jack Canfield, aren't you?" And I said, "Yeah," thinking she knows who I am. I'm pretty cool. And then she said, "It's your name tag." Kind of reduced my ego a little bit. And then she said, "What are you and Mark up to? You're the chicken soup guys, right?" And I said, "Yeah." I said, "We just decided to sell 1 million books in one day." She said, "Really? I can help you do that." As fast as I said it, she said, "I can help you do that." And I said, "Really, how?" She said, "I'm the buyer for the W.H. Smith bookstores." Now, if you've ever been in an airport, most of them have a W.H. Smith bookstore. And she said, "What we could do is put all your co-authors, along with you and Mark, in the East Coast around 6 in the morning, and we'll put you in New York and Boston and Washington and Atlanta and Miami, and we'll have you sign books for 2 hours. And then we'll put you on a plane and we'll fly you over to Cleveland and Detroit and Chicago, and then we'll fly you again to maybe Salt Lake City and Dallas, and we'll take you all the way across the country. And in the evening, you can be signing books in California and Portland, Oregon and Washington, D.C. I said, why would you help us do that? She called me dummy at that point. She said, dummy, if I sold 1 million books in one day, don't you think that would make me look like a champion of my boss? I said, absolutely, I get it. Now, a lot of people would say, oh, you were just lucky. That was coincidental that you got this person to sit down next to you. I say, no. We sent out an email saying, Jack and Mark want to sell 1 million books in one day. Anyone who wants to play, please reply. And the way she replied was by sitting next to me on the bus. When you start using the law of attraction, you don't always attract to you the item. You don't get the car showing up in your garage. But what you do get is the resources, the strategies, the magazine articles, the books that people put in your hand, the seminars they tell you to take, and people like this sitting down next to you saying, hey, I can partner with you and we can make this happen. And that's happened over and over and over and over in our life. A couple of months ago, I said, I want to go to the Olympics in Beijing. I'd never been to the Olympics except in LA for one day. I said, I want to go. 30 days later, I'm walking into a company that I do some speaking for called Isogenics to give them a big motivational talk. And as I'm walking in the back,